Welcome, everyone. I'm Cole Altom. I'm the Compass editor here at Stratfor. With me today is Matt Bay. He's our expert on Africa and energy issues. Now, Matt, we don't get to talk too much about Africa, especially for a product like Compass. But the elections are actually pretty important, obviously, for the people who live in Nigeria, but also for the oil companies who do business there. We know that whoever does win is going to inherit all of Nigeria's problems, least of which is, of course, the energy industry. Talk about that.
Right. So the energy industry has been kind of declining to a certain degree over the last 5 to 10 years. Production has more or less been stabilized since the late 1990s, around 2.2, 2.3 million barrels per day. That's stayed the same, but what we have seen is Nigeria's oil production move further and further away from land. So at first, when they started back in the 1960s, it was almost all onshore, and then they started to do shallow development, and then they went into the deep water. So now Nigeria's oil production is roughly 33% onshore, 33% shallow, and then 33% deep water. But the problem is that it's going deeper to the deep water. That's going to be the place where a lot of the growth is going forward to replace declining production from these old fields that have been in production for 20, 30 years onshore. And in order to do that, they need to make these big investments. Now, the problem with the big investments has been that they've been stalled because of the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is a big, wide-ranging bill which is supposed to reform a lot of aspects of the energy sector, including redoing some of the contracts, setting up a petroleum host fund, which would funnel monies into communities that actually host petroleum-bearing wells and things like that, and then also downstream some regulatory aspects in terms of pricing for diesel, fuels, petrol, stuff like that. Now, the big aspect for the deep water is that the contracts that were originally signed were in the 1990s when oil prices were really, really low, and now we're actually to a point where they're a little bit higher. Obviously, they've fallen a lot over the last year, but they're renegotiating these contract models to make them more appealing to Nigeria. Nigeria themselves is something that's a big aspect. And what we have seen on the flip side is that oil companies not really understanding the regulatory system going forward have delayed a lot of their projects. Now, the oil is a big problem for whoever is coming into power, but the more immediate concern is actually going to be the economy as we are in a period of low oil prices. So the Naira has fallen dramatically since November. The budget has been slashed significantly. Austerity has become an issue, and we've actually seen Jonathan start to decide to maybe even reduce the petroleum subsidy program. Now, the petroleum subsidy program is a very politically dicey program. A lot of the Nigerians, when they think of the economy, the economy's health, they think about their petrol costs. So if he starts to cut these fuels, that's going to lead to social unrest, and that's going to be a challenge that Jonathan, or even Buhari, if he wins, they're going to have to deal with, and that's going to be something that comes up at the beginning of the term as opposed to the PIB, which is a longer-term thing that could happen over the course of, say, 2 or 3 years.
Now, Matt, for many, Nigeria has become synonymous with Boko Haram, obviously the very famous, now infamous militant group up in the Northeast. How will they play into the elections?
So Jonathan has tried to actually do some stuff with Boko Haram, but Jonathan, his supporters are in the South, so that's kind of his core constituency. So what happens in Boko Haram in the Northeast, it's kind of an issue that to the point where as long as it doesn't affect his re-election chances or undermine his own power, it's something he can live with without having to put too much of a pressure behind him. Now, obviously, he's done a lot to do that and look for the girls and things like that. Whereas Buhari, he's from the North. He's a former military commander, former military head of state, actually, and he has some of the constituents from the Northeast that would want him to bring a much stronger push against Boko Haram. And he actually has a little bit better connections than Jonathan does to do it. However, even if Buhari wins, he faces a lot of constraint of actually being able to stop the movement entirely. There will still be a lot of violence in the region.
Well, the election's only 2 weeks away, so whatever happens, we won't have to wait long. Thanks for joining me. If you want to find out more about Compass, visit us at stratfor.com, or you can read our issue of Compass, which comes out on February 2nd. Thanks for joining.